Coming up on this week's GCN Racing news show, the coronavirus outbreak has led to the postponement of some key Italian races. We're going to take a look at what impact it could have on the season as a whole. Despite that, Paris-Nice got underway in France yesterday. Plus, we've got the Grand Prix Monséré and Le Samyn. And we're also going to pay tribute to Nicolas Portal, who sadly passed away last week. We'll start though with the racing that actually did take place. Paris-Nice, the 8-day race to the sun, started on Sunday with a 154km stage starting and finishing in Plaisir. It was a reduced peloton that started. 7 teams had put in place self-imposed restrictions and pulled out of all competition, generally for a 2-week period until the Volta Catalunya. They being Team Ineos, home to last year's winner Egan Bernal, UAE Team Emirates, Jumbo-Visma, Astana, Movistar, Mitchelton Scott and the CCC team. And so, 136 riders from 17 teams took to the start line, but this being Paris-Nice, they weren't together very long. An initial break of 2 riders had already been caught by the time live television started, such were the nerves in the bunch. Everybody wanted to be at the front in case of crosswinds, but in the end, the first split was caused by one of the crashes. One of which was this one, involving French champion Warren Barguil. Initially, it did look as though it could be race over for him, but eventually his team managed to persuade him to continue, and he did get to the finish line. Only to be disqualified for drafting behind the Arkea Samsic team car for too long. A little bit harsh, that one. I know rules are rules, but you have almost zero chance of finishing inside the time limit if you find yourself alone and off the back on a stage like that. And it's not like he got towed back to the front group. He finished the stage 14 minutes down, and so really played no factor in the outcome of it. That said, had he not been disqualified, he may well have played an important role as lieutenant to Nairo Quintana, who is still on impressive form. Now the rule, should you be interested, is number 2.12.007.4.7, which forbids riding behind team vehicles, but UCI commissaires do often turn a blind eye to it. For good reason, in my opinion, otherwise pretty much anyone who had a crash, mechanical or puncture in the first few kilometres of a tough stage would find themselves outside the time limit and therefore out of the race. On the other hand, if a rider has been dropped because they couldn't keep up, then they'll impose the rule. Other times it's on a case-by-case basis, as we saw last year with Niels Elkoff at the World Championships. The Dutchman had crashed early doors, put back in his own dislocated shoulder, got back to the bunch behind the team car, and then went on to win the race. Only to have the rainbow bands denied to him by the commissaires, who disqualified him before the podium ceremony took place. It's a difficult one, and it can be frustrating because the rules don't seem to be applied in the same way with every case. It almost feels like they implement the rule if the rider then goes on to take a big result, such as Akoff, or is caught by the TV cameras, as was the case yesterday for Barguil. Anyway, we would love to get your thoughts on this particular subject. Do you think drafting behind a team car should be allowed after a crash or a mechanical? Let us know by taking the poll, which is over on the GCN app. You'll find a link to that in the description below. Speaking of polls, last week we asked you if the team pursuit world record could go under 3 minutes and 40 seconds at some point, and 49% of you said it would in Tokyo this year at the Olympics. We shall see if it indeed takes place. Anyway, back to the race. Crashes and crosswinds led to a number of splits. Alaphilippe and a number of the classic specialists made the front group, as did Nairo Quintana, who is once again proving himself to be more than capable on flat, windy roads. Behind, though, Nibali had been caught out, although not as much as his Trek Segafredo teammate Richie Porte, who would end the day almost 3 minutes down. At the front of the race, it was Thies Benoot and Julian Alaphilippe who'd light things up towards the finish. The former attacking on a small climb, atop which the first intermediate sprint was located. Alaphilippe caught and passed him before the top, but they pressed on afterwards and opened up an advantage which was close to 50 seconds with 10 kilometres of the stage remaining. They would eventually get caught after the final cobbled climb, but only by 2 riders, Dylan Teuns of Bahrain McLaren and Max Schachmann of Bora Hansgrohe. Now you could tell just from the body language in the final sprint just how hard the day had been for everybody. The man with the most energy left though was the German champion, first win of the year and the first German to lead the race since John Degenkolb back in 2014. The race will continue today with another one that could be complicated by crosswinds. We have got daily highlights for you right here on GCN Racing, which we'll get up for you as soon as we possibly can after each stage. Also, an apology for yesterday's highlights, where I said that Sam Bennett rides for Bora Hansgrohe. It would have been a facepalm moment had we not been advised not to touch our faces right now, so I'll just issue a sincere apology. We shall move on now though to the cancellation, or at least postponement, of 3 of the biggest races in the Italian season. It was a case of will they, won't they last week, as we all waited to see what the decision was going to be about the running of Strada Bianca, Tirreno Adriatico and Milano San Remo, and indeed, who would actually make that decision in the first place. And before it even was made, many teams have stated that they wouldn't be attending, the first of those being EF Pro Cycling, closely followed by those that are absent from Paris-Nice. Eventually, RCS Sport announced the postponement of Strada Bianca, and then soon after that, Tirreno and San Remo too, after new government guidelines in Italy basically made them impossible to run. Now, many of the teams had already made the trip over to Italy, so Simon Geschke named his recon ride 2021 Strada Bianca Recon, and Michał Kwiatkowski rode the entire route on his own. Now, the last time that one of the big monument classics was not contested was in fact Milano San Remo back in 1945, so 75 years ago. That same year was also the last time that one of the spring monuments took place later in the year. Liège-Bastogne-Liège hadn't taken place in April due to German occupation of the region, but as the Second World War came to an end soon after, it was rearranged and took place in August. So, the notion that Milano San Remo could actually take place in October this year is not without precedent. And RCS have suggested that the races are postponed, not cancelled, which has led many to speculate as to where, in cycling's rather busy pro calendar, they might sit. Now, some have suggested that the season could continue for 2 weeks past Il Lombardia, with San Remo at the final race on the last Saturday in October. All speculation right now, of course, and given how quickly the virus appears to be spreading in Italy, you wonder how much racing there will be full stop in 2020. If that is the case, it could have a huge impact on RCS Sport and also Italian cycling as a whole. The latter has been struggling over the last few years with no teams in the World Tour anymore, and those cancellations, or at least postponements, are really going to hit the second division pro teams hard, the likes of Bardiani CSF, Androni and Vinny Zabu KTM. Also, if the Cobble Classics do take place this year, they too have already been affected to a degree. Because whilst the likes of Alaphilippe, Sagan, Sturven, Benoit, Gilbert and Degenkolb should get 8 days of hard racing in France, the rest, like Van Aert, Van der Poel, Kristoff and Van Avermaet for example, will have to be training very hard somewhere else. So it could be very interesting to see how those two groups compare at the Cobble Classics. Maybe it could change Classics preparation forever. We shall wait and see. Meanwhile, half of the teams who'd been held in quarantine over at the UAE Tour have been allowed to leave, they being Cofidis and Groupama FDJ of France. Gazprom Rusvelo and UAE Team Emirates are currently still there, with Diego Ulissi missing the birth of his daughter just a few days ago. Back to the racing though that is taking place, and on Sunday we had the Grand Prix Monséré. There, a textbook lead out from De Koning Quickstep put Dutch champion Fabio Jacobsen in the perfect position, and he duly finished it off with a comfortable win over Dupont and De Decker of Circus Wanty Gobert. Jacobsen had been due to participate at Tirreno Adriatico, but like most teams who have opted to continue competing, De Koning have reshuffled a few rosters around. That marked Jacobsen's 3rd win of the season so far, and the 15th for his team De Koning. They didn't have it all their own way though at Samyn last Tuesday. In fact, their best placed rider was last year's winner, Florian Sénéchal, who had to settle for 5th. This year, the sprint amongst a small group was won by Frenchman Hugo Hofstetter of the Israel Startup Nation, only his 2nd win as a pro, and a very emotional one at that. In 3rd place on the day was David Decker. Now he is the son of Eric, and those of you who've been watching bike racing for a long time will remember that Eric was quite a good rider, earning the nickname Triple Decker after winning 3 stages in the 2000 Tour. Now son David had already won his first race of the season a couple of days previous, and then he won again yesterday at the Dorpen Omloop Rookven, and it looks like he's got a bright future ahead of him. The women's event didn't finish in a sprint, far from it in fact. Former world champion Chantal van den Broek-Black took flight with 60 kilometres of the 98-kilometre race still remaining, and was never seen again. It was a display of dominance from her, and indeed from her team Bulls Dulmans, who took 1st, 2nd, 4th and 7th on the day. And this week's GCN Rider of the Week is Chantal. You don't see rides of that dominance very often. We're going to move on to some other races now in the form of the Tours of Taiwan and Rwanda. Now, unfortunately, we don't have rights to any footage of those races, and none of the photographers we work with were there either, But we're going to go through a few key results anyway. So firstly, huge congratulations to Nick White, who won a stage and the general classification over in Taiwan. Now, a few of you might remember Nick from the Zwift Academy back in 2017, where he got to the final but didn't quite win. Well, he has been winning since, because this is the latest in a series of impressive results for him, so maybe he will soon get his chance in the World Tour. Certainly feels like he deserves one. Meanwhile, in Rwanda, the biggest bike race in Africa, Natnael Tafejon became the third Eritrean to win the race overall. Now, his list of results this year are impressively consistent, to say the very least. And he is another rider that I would not be at all surprised to see move up to the World Tour next year. He's currently riding for Team NTT's Continental Development Team. In other news, it looks as though a Women's Tour de France, organised by ASO, could be a reality in a not too distant future. Now, I'm sure that there's still a long way to go with this, but ASO are making all the right noises. It won't run alongside the men's race, which apparently is a logistical impossibility, so it should have its own slot on the calendar. Now, there have been a few various previous incarnations of the Women's Tour de France, but the last of those, the Grand Boucle Féminin International, ceased to exist after the 2009 edition. So, it's been a long time coming, but here's hoping that this is more than just talk from Christian Prudhomme. Now, one race which definitely is set to make a return this year is the Ross over in Ireland after a one-year absence. And the organisation have just announced the route. So the 67th edition of the race is going to travel clockwise around Ireland, with stage finishes in Horse and Jockey, Castle Island, Lisdoonvarna, Kilbeggan, before starting the final stage in Kinnegad to the finishing circuit in the seaside town of Blackrock in County Louth. I know the comments are going to run wild with those pronunciations. But anyway, the new 5-day event will cover 758 kilometres and, as ever, be a mix of current and aspiring pros, as well as local county riders, which is one of the things that has always made that event unique. Unfortunately, we are going to finish this week's racing news show with some really sad news. The cycling world was left in shock last week as Nico Portal passed away on Tuesday afternoon at the age of 40. The Frenchman had been a sports director at Team Ineos and a former pro rider. He'd had a successful 9-year career on the bike, which included a stage win at the Critérium du Dauphiné Libéré in 2004. But as a sports director, he racked up a list of accolades as long as your arm. In fact, he was a major part of 8 of Team Sky's Grand Tour wins with 3 different riders. But it's not a list of successes that he will be best remembered for. As tributes flooded in from around the cycling world, it became immediately apparent to those of us who didn't know him well that Nico is one of the most down-to-earth, friendly, motivated, likeable and respected men in the sport. And he was a journalist's dream. He would always make time to speak to everybody, whether it had been a successful day or not for the team, giving an interesting insight and not skirting around the more difficult questions posed to him. And, above all of that, he was a devoted husband and father. His funeral is going to be held today in southwest France, and we would like to offer our sincere condolences to his family, his friends and his teammates. He's a man that is going to be sorely missed, and as Chris Froome said, he'll be irreplaceable. Rest in peace, Nico.